All right, what should you look for in chapter 3 on creation? I'll be honest, this is, I think, one of my favorite chapters in the book. This is one of my favorite topics, just theologically and philosophically to think about. Uh, remember that, remember the definition of a myth. Um, Myths are by definition true. They're true in how they answer fundamental questions. Now, I talk about this in more detail in the actual lecture on this chapter. But one of the things I think you need to think of while you're reading it is how myths are true. So if you were to do a quick Google search of creation myths or creation narratives, you will find scores of different myths, especially from the ancient world, from all over the world actually, and how they describe creation. And when you read them, if you've ever read Epic of Gilgamesh, you know that they are far less concerned with saying how the creation of the world happened. Nobody was there so many billion years ago when that happened. But they're more concerned about like how they can answer fundamental questions such as who is God? What does it mean to be human? What is our role in humanity? These fundamental questions that philosophy and theology has and will continue to try to answer. So there are two creation narratives. Again, you're going to watch other videos about this, but there are two creation narratives in the book of Genesis. And they both reference God bringing order out of chaos. So Genesis 1 talks about God bringing order out of the tohu vabohu in Hebrew, out of the chaotic, formless void. And the second creation narrative in Genesis chapter 2 talks about God ordering creation out of water. And so my question is, and he does, I think, a beautiful job talking about this in the chapter, is why then does the Christian tradition say God created the world out of nothing? So it was in the second century, actually, that Christians developed this doctrine of creation ex nihilo in response to a few different groups. So you really need to pay attention to the different groups here. First were the Gnostics. So be sure that you really understand who the Gnostics were, at least in the way in which McGrath talks about them. You don't need to go Google and read for 2 hours on ancient Gnosticism. But it was a philosophy that adopted many aspects of early Christianity. They believed in two gods. They believed in a greater God who redeemed the world, in other words, Jesus, and they believed in a lesser God who created the world, in other words, like the God of the Hebrew Bible. So the goal for them was to obtain knowledge. Gnostic comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means knowledge, and remove one's attachment to this world. Okay, we'll talk about that here in a second. They were strongly influenced by Platonic dualism. So what is dualism? Plato, again, pay attention in the chapter where he talks about dualism. Many people today, in many ways, are still dualistic. So Plato, he proposed this idea that there were two realities or two forms. One is the realm of being, the realm of the forms, and up here everything is perfect. There is a perfect form of justice. There's a perfect form of a cat. There's a perfect form of good. There's a perfect form of a table, to use this image. And then in the realm of becoming, where you and I are, there are imperfect images of this. So like there's a perfect form of justice in the realm of the forms. Down here, there are imperfect forms of justice. There are several different types of ways about bringing about justice. But if you were to really take his argument to the extent that early Gnostics did, everything in the realm of the forms is perfect or is good. Knowledge is up here. And everything down here in the realm of becoming is changeable. You can look down here, it's imperfect. And so the Gnostics, as well as some of the Platonists, believed that the created order was evil, was imperfect, was not good. And if you read the creation narratives, especially Genesis 1, you come away with the conviction that the creation is good and that God's creation is good. So be sure that you can talk about why it was that Christians created or argued that God created the world out of nothing, especially when you're reading this. So don't get caught up in the American, quote, debate regarding creation and evolution. The theological claims are important here. So whenever he's talking about the implications of God as creator and the models of God as creator. Be sure you're paying attention to the deeper theological claims about God, about humanity, about the human role, and not like God created the world 6,000 years ago. Like that is not what we're dealing with here by any means. One of the things that I really like about Christian theology is how it deals very, I think, honestly with human nature. Unfortunately, some people think that like because one is Christian, like that they are perfect, and that is far from the truth. So what does it mean to be created in God's image? Jews and Christians have long said This is in Genesis 1, I think like 25, 26, 27, 28, somewhere in there. That humans are created in the image of God. And so what does that mean? It's not that God looks like you or looks like me, but much like ancient Rome, there would be busts of the emperor all throughout the empire to show the Roman Empire who the emperor was. In other words, there are certain traits that you and I have that are very similar to God. We have the capacity to love. We change. We can adapt in situations. So be sure that you understand, especially those 3 points when he talks about humans and being created God in God's image. And then the final thing I want to introduce to you is revelation. How does one reveal? How does God reveal God's self? So I can look at you and I can assume that you are a high school student. Um, if I saw you out of school and I didn't know who you were, I could kind of guess your age. I could know some basic things about you, hair color, maybe eye color, height, but I wouldn't know your name or I wouldn't know what school you went to unless you actually told me, unless you actually revealed that to me. So there's a difference, Christians say, between knowing certain things about God just by general knowledge, by reason. We call this kind of natural theology, deducing knowledge about God by reason and experience of nature. But this is limited. This can only get you so far. General revelation will only get you so far. And so this is why I think that we should actually start talking about faith here, because the person of faith, I think, makes a leap and says that God has revealed God's self in history, in religious texts, in personal experience, in reason. And so be sure that you understand what he's talking about when he's talking about the difference between natural theology and revelation. So I want to just one quick note here. So as a teacher in an Episcopal school, I really don't think that anybody in Episcopal schools will ever teach the idea of creationism, that God created the world 6,000 years ago. And many theologians argue that the Bible does not seek to answer that. Remember, these ancient myths are myths. They are profoundly true in how they answer these fundamental questions, but they are not books of science. The Jews didn't even know the dinosaurs existed. Nobody knew the dinosaurs existed, and I think until like the 17th or 18th century. And so, of course, the Bible is not going to talk about dinosaurs. So what's important then? Please understand that this whole this belief that if you're a Christian, you cannot believe in evolution, that's only an American problem. So what's important? The theology is important. How do these texts answer those basic questions of human experience?